And I'm wondering, outside of just this sort of economic resentment that the people of Iran might be having towards China, not just Iran, but all of the Middle East. I mean, China is not known for treating Muslims particularly well. So how do these countries feel about working with a regime that is committing ethnic cleansing on the Uyghur Muslims?
This is always, I think, a mystery to a lot of Western observers, and rightly so. But I think there are a couple of explanations for it. The most straightforward explanation, and this applies actually much less in Iran than it does in Saudi Arabia and much of the GCC, though not all, well, mostly all except for Qatar. But because those states actually have such tight control over their own local media, combined with the fact that even though you're in Saudi Arabia, you can get CNN, right? But how often it does, they do mention the Uyghurs on CNN, but it's not on all the time, right? It's not, even if you watch CNN day and night, you're not going to see that much about it. And so in some ways, it's actually due to control of the information environment in the Gulf. I mean, that explains why the people don't get so upset and put this sort of pressure on their own governments. But what that doesn't explain is why the people in government themselves are okay with it, or are I don't want to say okay, but have at least tacit acquiescence, right? And I think that does vary between states. In the case of Iran, that has also caused domestic tension, in part because part of Iran's stated from 1979 on, one of their stated purposes of the revolution is first, protection of Shias, but second, protection of the oppressed and Muslims everywhere. And this certainly falls under that second one.
Well, the Iranian people are mostly Shia, but the Uyghur Muslims, those who still practice in Western China, are predominantly Sunni.
Right, but it's still the second sort of tier, and it's still it is still part of their stated purpose, right? That if the choice is Shia or Sunni, it's going to go with Shia, but otherwise, it is incongruous with many of their other positions. And because of that, there is not unanimity among the Iranian cabinet, among the Iranian clerical establishment. There's also not unanimity about the relationship with the CCP either. And in that case, because you're talking about people who, frankly, they're going to get their money no matter what. It's not about the manufacturing for them. But there are some people, especially in the clerical establishment, for whom they take these things seriously. It's not just about, I don't know, domestic politics. It's not just about geopolitics at all. They really have a strong belief that they should be assisting oppressed Muslim communities. And thus, this also creates tension I don't know if I could say I have insight into the supreme leader's inner circle, but again, into the clerical establishment that has been largely co-opted by the supreme leader. This is one of the few real signs of tension. Whereas in the GCC, in a country like Saudi Arabia, MBS exerts such total control over the government and the media, and the people, that he can silence opposition. It's not that Iran doesn't do that, but he can do it in a much less public way, and he can keep reporting about this away from the broader population. But so it is an absolute incongruity. It is, in some ways, it seems sort of inexplicable. But when you look at what the people in the region, the media that they consume, and what they report, it makes at least a little bit more sense, I guess.
Well, another incongruity that this is a great mystery to me of China's interaction with the Middle East is, Iran has said they want to wipe Israel off the map. China is somehow able to do business with all of the countries of the Middle East, including Israel. How does that work?
Yeah, it's another really good question, and I think if we look at this from a couple of different capitals, I think it plays differently. So inside Iran, this also, in my opinion, is probably, I don't think any one of these things would sort of shatter the 25-year comprehensive strategic partnership that we're about 2 years into right now between Iran and China. But it is something that people in government and the population are aware of. And there's this view: why are we becoming so close with this country that is making these strategic investments in Israel? And actually even more so in the GCC. There's a lot more, it's not huge, but a lot more person-to-person exchange, educational exchange between China and the GCC and China and Israel than there is between China and Iran. And the size of the economy of the GCC and Israel is significantly bigger than in Iran. And so inside Iran, you have some people as well who are some constituencies who are like, okay, I understand the necessity of this relationship in the moment, but if push comes to shove, if there is some sort of regional conflict, China is not going to be on our side. Just as we assume, and I think historically, probably correctly, they have as well, that China's sort of in it for the money. And thus, or at least that's priority one. And they figure China is going to stay out of it, or if anything, they would be more likely to assist the GCC because they get more oil from Saudi Arabia alone than they do from Iran, and they're larger markets. And so that also, makes people a little bit wary. Inside, now the Chinese relationship with the GCC and especially with Israel is a bit trickier because sort of question is not our power has limits, right? I mean, our military power, our economic power, our political capital, it has limits. I don't think, we can assume that we can be able to do everything, but do I think we could have put or continue to put much more pressure on Israel over doing business with the CCP than we do? Absolutely. Right? China owns or has a long-term contract to operate Haifa port. They're also constructing a new port in Ashdod. These would be like the two major ports in Israel. Israeli law, which is written to a large, in this regard, about Chinese investment, designed a bit to placate the US, but it exempts trade in high tech. Right? So there are very few limits on what Israeli high-tech firms, including firms that clearly have produce dual-use technology, like China. It's not just that they sell things to China; it's that China invests in those companies. Like the CCP essentially subsidiaries are part owners, and this is something that I think I think we could do more about. I think it's something that we would actually do more about if there was greater awareness of it in the United States. And what I am not saying is that we should shatter the US-Israel relationship over it. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is one of the benefits of the close relationship that we have with Israel, including in these same regards, weapons and high-tech trade and stuff like that, that we should actually leverage that. And I think we could probably leverage that and get Chinese investment, at least in these industries, out. And it does not seem to me that we've even started down that road. And that's just the Israel case. There's also the underlying, one other connected to Israel, You also have a lot of talk in the media. I was at a symposium all day at the Council on Foreign Relations yesterday that spent a lot of time talking about the possibility of Saudi-Israeli normalization in exchange for a U.S. defense treaty, mutual defense treaty with Saudi Arabia. And the, I think, near universal assumption is that this is, in addition to being driven a bit by domestic politics here, that this is driven by an attempt to get the Saudis to stop doing, to stop buying weapons from China, to increase oil capacity, that it's done to disrupt that relationship. That one I'm a little bit skeptical about. I'm not skeptical that that's the intent. I do think that is driving part of it. I'm just skeptical that it will have that impact. I'm not sure that MBS is, I don't think he has Washington's best interests at heart, let's say.